Hello and welcome to the show. Time has come to roll some more vehicles on Forza 7, and we start today with the Illumicraft buggy. Now, theoretically, the buggies should be easier to roll in the sense that they will have a considerably higher centre of mass because, well, they've got a huge amount of ground clearance. However, certainly from standard, you have very soft suspension. You have a lot of suspension travel. They're designed to soak up bumps, and that's not good when it comes to rolling vehicles off of curbs. I mean, sure, these things will roll over in the desert racing, yes, but we're not doing that here. On Forza 7, we have a curb to throw the vehicle off. Also, ignore the random colour changes going on. I don't know why, sometimes when loading up vehicles into free play, it messes around with the liveries on them, so what should be a black and orange is a grey and purple. Yeah, don't ask. So, as far as rolling the vehicle stock goes, I didn't expect it to work particularly, and sure enough, that was the case. While it does still get up onto two wheels ever so slightly, it's never going to be enough to roll it. You can see, well, the suspension does what it's supposed to do. The suspension absorbs the bumps, and there is a huge amount of suspension travel in this. So when you hit a curb, this is a big curb, this is a very, very nasty curb. Hell, it's the nastiest curb I can find in the game, and it will still launch the buggy slightly onto its side, but it's never going to be enough to launch the thing over. There is just so much suspension travel to soak up that shock that it's never going to be enough to launch it fully onto its side. I think that's perhaps one of the best runs that I had in terms of rolling the vehicle stock. I tried a little while just to see if hitting it in different ways would get it to work, but the answer to that is a resounding no. You can get the buggy to get into trouble across the area, and I did sort of try a little bit with the whole launching tactic that I used with the race cars, with the Lamborghini Centenario as well. And the buggy would get a little bit in the air, but it's never going to be enough to roll over. So it was to the tuning. Didn't need to upgrade the vehicle. Of course, it's a racing vehicle from, well, as I say, it's from standard it starts off. It's a race vehicle, so you can adjust the suspension, which meant stiffen everything up as much as possible. Increase the ride height where we could. We were already pretty tall to begin with, but even higher. The higher that centre of mass, the better chance I have of rolling it over. And by stiffening everything up, it removes all of that absorption, and immediately it's looking a lot more plausible. Now, it's still on the same size tyres, still on the same sort of tyres, it's still on, I guess, off-road spec tyres almost on this from standard. So the grip levels that this is producing aren't crazy. I mean, they're decent, but it's not a crazy level of grip you're getting from the tyres. And admittedly, I didn't exactly hit the curb the best I could have done on that second attempt, but it wouldn't take particularly long before, you know, marked improvements were happening with the Illumicraft, and sure enough, it would go for a big tumble. With the suspension set as stiff as it is, there is also a very, very bizarre side effect in that the buggy doesn't quite know what to do. Kind of bounces around on the suspension in a very, very unsettling manner. So when I go to pull it off of the tyre bundle, it kind of flips onto its wheels, but in a really awkward manner. It gets a little bit confused. It gets a little bit confused indeed. And yeah, a couple more messings around, and the Illumicraft will go over without too much trouble. Well, with the suspension stiffened up, there was always likely to be a vehicle. I would expect, with the level of kind of ground clearance that you've got with this, the high centre of mass, one that we would see tumble over. Up next, we would have the Dodge Challenger. Now, from stock, my initial kind of guesstimations for this vehicle that it perhaps wouldn't quite go over. While it has a higher centre of mass than some vehicles, it's, again, the soft suspension that might be the vehicle's undoing. Now, it's not going to be as bad, of course, as the Illumicraft. It's not going to have that level of suspension travel, but the Challenger, while being a relatively decent handling muscle car, has still got very, very soft suspension. So that force, that important force that is needed to fire the car up onto its side, is unlikely to, well, be going through the Challenger enough. The first attempt with it showed some promise for the Dodge. It was getting onto its side. Now, not enough to roll the vehicle over, but it was getting more onto its side than we had seen perhaps from the Illumicraft. The next run was a little bit Dukes of Hazzard in slightly the wrong car. The going ultra aggressive across the curb and kind of really launching the vehicle was what worked with the race cars with the high-end Lamborghini last time out. I didn't really hit it properly with the Challenger. We kind of got more airtime than we did firing it onto its side, but it wasn't looking particularly promising. It wasn't looking like it was going to be enough, really. It kind of bounced its way onto its side, but again, we were seeing very, very soft suspension was kind of doing its job, essentially. It was doing enough to cushion the blow that it was never enough to get the Challenger up and over. And even if it could hold itself on its side, I'm not sure the car would have had enough grip, because there are two important factors when we're doing these rolls. The vehicle needs to be able to get far enough up onto its side to go over, but when up on its side, it needs to have enough grip to essentially pull itself over, which I didn't think the Challenger would have either. But I was going to give it a go for the next run, upgraded suspension and only suspension. The rest of the car the same as it was from stock. So suspension raised and stiffened. Also, the car given as much camber as we can possibly get. And you can immediately see the difference on that opening run. It was a long way up onto its side. A hell of a lot further than we'd ever had on any of the previous runs. It was... Again, you were getting that force to go through the car far enough to launch it on its side. Now, in the Lumicraft, once we got it up onto its side, because that really, really high centre of mass, that would be enough to see it tumble over. In the Challenger, not quite so much. We just didn't have the outright grip. As I initially expected, as I said, it just doesn't have enough grip on the standard tyres to get it to go over here. It gets close. It's a promising amount of on its side, two-wheeled action. There we go. That's the better way of putting it. Yeah, it's promising, but never quite going to be enough. I tried a few times, but with no real luck in getting the car over. Got some long two-wheeled stints, bounced it awkwardly across the sort of secondary curb there, but it wasn't going to tumble over. So back to the upgrade shop, stuck the vehicle on the sport tyres. Didn't go all the way for race tyres. I had sport tyres owned. Didn't want to spend 10 grand on race tyres, but I figured this car was going to go over pretty easy. So sport tyres and maximum tyre widths. With the, big step in improvement we'd had just with the suspension, I was expecting, or I was hoping, shall we say, that this one would be enough. Wasn't the best first attempt from the Challenger. I'll be honest, it wasn't a huge amount better on that first run. The next attempt, though, it very, very nearly went over. It was on the way to going over. As it skidded along on the door, it caught the curb, the sort of outside curb, and that stopped it from tumbling over before it then skidded on its door into a tyre bundle. Not exactly what you want to have happen with your rolling car. I tried firing it across the curb in the other direction. That wasn't going quite as well for launching this. It's a funny old curb that we're attacking here. There's a whole different raft of approaches that can work. In a car like the Challenger, this angle is working perfectly well. That time around, we had no issues with the Dodge going over. Yeah, once we were getting it far enough up onto its side with the suspension, all it needed was that little bit more grip, and that would be enough to see the Dodge tumble over. Perhaps not quite as spectacular as the Illumicraft, and it doesn't quite freak out as much when you roll it back over onto its wheels, but the Challenger has been successfully rolled. Up next, the Cadillac Limo. Now this, I had no real idea of what to expect, whether the vastness of the car would throw up any oddities in trying to roll. Again, in terms of centre of mass, we want it to be as high as possible, and the limo isn't going to have an ultra-low centre of mass, but equally it's not a truck. So, yeah, I honestly had no real idea as to how this one was going to react. I thought I'd have a go with it stock. Didn't really expect this one to be going over stock, and sure enough, we had a similar problem that we've had with the previous two vehicles so far today, and that is the suspension so very soft that the vehicle just it was barely even being put up onto two wheels. I guess, that the limo built for comfort a bit more, and yeah, it just rides across the curb like you would expect a vehicle to. It rides across the curb, maybe leaves the ground ever so slightly, but certainly, you know, it's barely enough to even see the underside of the car, barely enough to see from a lot of these replay cameras to see the car that's actually on its side. So, yeah, from standard, it's just not going to fire itself up. It's also not massively quick. It's probably the slowest car that I've tried so far in this series. So you aren't hitting... Now, you don't need a huge amount of speed. You need to hit the curb at the right angle rather than hit them with a lot of force to get the vehicle to tumble over. But even so, you need an amount of speed. And the limo was, yeah, not particularly fast. So, having had not a huge amount of luck with the car standard, off to the upgrade shop. Race suspension, of course, raised, stiffened, max camber, and race tyres fitted to the vehicle with the maximum tyre width. And for this kind of opening foray, I didn't really know what we were going to be seeing from them because there had been absolutely no hope at all from standard. However, upgraded, no problems. No problems whatsoever for the Cadillac. First attempt, hit the curb, and sure enough, it went tumbling. Quite spectacular tumbling. I mean, you kind of get spectacular crashes with the limo, just because of the size. If it goes over, it goes over in spectacular fashion. Now, I tried hitting the curb from a couple of different angles, and there it had sort of bigger issues. I haven't got over on the first attempt. I was expecting to have to kind of do a bit more work, so I wanted to see what else I could manage with the limo, and it wasn't a particular fan of hitting the curb in any of the other directions. It didn't really show much promise in rolling from the other angles. It's just the approach that you were getting here, and perhaps the speed that I could gain from the limo there was enough. While I didn't get it to go over on that particular attempt, that was the angle that was having the most promise with the Cadillac. A different thing, not really come across that so far in this series, but again, there was an angle that worked. The fact that I was going back now and trying to replicate the results didn't kind of matter so much. The series is about getting the car to fall over, and we'd managed to do that on the first attempt. But yeah, promise-wise, only really that angle was working for the Caddy. Either way, it had gone tumbling over, and that mission was complete. The final car for today, another race vehicle. A BMW British touring car. This one, all of these vehicles here were suggested in the comments. This one was a challenge to me. Apparently someone reckoned it was unrollable. And naturally, when you give me a challenge like that, I'm going to have a go. Of course, the plus points for a race car, you've got a very, very stiff chassis. You've got race suspension from standard. And of course, we've been talking about needing a lot of grip to get the cars to roll over. The race cars are going to have high levels of grip. Those things are all good, because race cars also have as low a centre of mass as possible, and are certainly not designed with rolling over in mind. On the first run, the BMW showed more promise than I initially feared, certainly from the McLaren, the GT3 car that we had last time. The BMW was getting further onto its side, and the problem we had with the Centenario and the McLaren was the front splitters catching on the floor when they did get up on their side. And while the BMW touring car here is low to the ground, it isn't as low as the previous two, so there was that little bit more smidge of hope with the touring car. And sure enough, throwing it off the curb, again, this is the car being run completely standard here. You're throwing it off the curb and getting a decent amount of airtime, although perhaps not so surprising, considering the amount of airtime, the amount of on two wheels these cars will do, certainly when they go around places like Knock Hill, for example. Yeah, they do get fired up onto their side quite well. I think that was the closest I ever really got with the car standard, a fair way onto its side. Not going to go for a tumble. So it was to the tuning. Again, I actually say to the tuning. One upgrade, or two upgrades were put on the car. I gave it maximum tyre widths, both front and rear, because it starts on racing slicks. Stiffened suspension, maximum camber, as high a ride height as I could get out of the BMW to try and get it to tumble over. And there was a marked improvement. The first run, it's getting further up onto its side. Okay, it wasn't the greatest bit of car positioning by me. It didn't really attack the curb quite the right way at that corner. But the amount and the time it spent on its side was a promising sign. However, it wouldn't be long before we fell back into a very familiar routine from the last time I tried to roll a race car. No matter how I hit the curb, I was struggling to get this car to really spend enough time up on its side. Again, we saw this with the GT3 cars and so on. If the vehicle's, the vehicle can get quite a long way onto two wheels, but if it's only spending a short amount of time on two wheels, it's probably not actually going to go over. could be very, very aggressive with the curb, and it just wasn't quite working. I tried different tactics with this one. I tried approaching the curb with a lot of speed, tried to really throw the car across it, launch it up into the air. It kind of worked as well in getting the car a long way onto its side, but again, it wasn't spending enough time on its side when I did that. And again, this route that I preferred in the previous episodes for launching vehicles wasn't really working very well for the BMW. I don't know what a lot of airtime there, but not a lot of rolling going on. With this high-speed approach, it was actually a secondary bump that was catching the car more than the first. So launching across the curb, it's on its side. There's a secondary bump when you leave to the runoff area that in some ways looked more likely for the car to tip over. But again, it wasn't looking hugely promising in the whole tumbling over department. I tried for a while, and I couldn't get it. Even try and run wide and launch it off the secondary curb that had got the Lamborghini. That was the closest I got it to tumble, actually, far across that secondary bump. Even the exit curb where we'd rolled the Lamborghini and McLaren, I couldn't get to work with the BMW. So I had to go back to tuning, and while I'd already applied all the usual stiffening and raising of suspension, I had to start playing around with other settings to see what I could get the car to do. What I found is lower the tyre pressure. I put the tyre pressure down to minimum, and that really, really did the trick. Why would this be working to make the cars roll over? Well, my best guess is that it's all to do with the contact patch. When you have the tyre pressure as low as possible, the contact patch between the tyre and the road is going to be as large. So when the car's up on its side, you've got that little bit extra grip. It's why we run the cars with the maximum negative camber that I can get on them. Because when the car's up on its side, where I need the car to have grip, the negative camber, the wheel leant over in that direction, the vehicle will have as big a contact patch, the tyre will have as big a contact patch with the road as possible, and that helps drag the car onto its roof, essentially. And by lowering the tyre pressure, again, it might not be by a huge amount, but it's enough, and you can see vast, vast improvements with this. It's the whole car spending longer on its side. It doesn't lose grip, or it doesn't lose grip as quickly when it's got this tyre pressure down, which means that there is more chance for the vehicle to roll over. Although I still hadn't actually got the vehicle to fall over. It was looking promising, but it hadn't gone over. I continued throwing it at all sorts of different angles. However, there was one different angle that I tried with the BMW here that really did the trick, and one that I'll probably experiment with more in the future. You see, it doesn't necessarily have to be taken with a huge amount of speed, but with exactly the perfect turn-in, the BMW would go over. That was a very slow approach. It's a very awkward angle. I have to dodge a tyre bundle and drive across the grass, but you hit the curb with enough steering at a kind of high enough point on the curb, and that would be the BMW roll. Now, admittedly, that roll was slightly grass-assisted, but yeah, this angle was working perfectly for getting the BMW that kind of period of time long enough on its side to go over. It hadn't been through the sheer speed that was doing it. It's from like precise parking the car on the apex, and sure enough, the other direction as well would see the BMW go over. So the BTCC car very much can roll. It certainly was a faff. It certainly was a real faff to get the vehicle to tumble over, and it was difficult to do it consistently, but if you hit that perfect point on the curb with a full amount of steering lock, you could get the car far enough up on its side and it would go. Hell, I rolled it twice. And that does open up some interesting possibilities. Certainly the McLaren and Centenario I will come back at some point and have a go with, because they were never tried with low tyre pressure. I didn't know, and they did go over a little bit cheatily, well, slightly weirdly, shall we say, with those. The BMW, well, okay, the first roll was slightly grass-assisted. If that had been a tarmac runoff area, the BMW, I'm fairly sure, would have gone over there. So I don't think that grass actually matters too much in that particular section. So, yeah, low tyre pressures is another thing to add to the growing list of how to make a car tumble over. That was the first thing as well I tried messing around with this setup, in the hope to get the BMW to go over those. There's still a whole bunch more categories that I can potentially change if we start getting really desperate later on down the line, but there we go. 4 cars have been tumbled today. if you guys want to leave suggestions for what you want to see me roll in the next episode, please do. In the comment section, have a look through there, and the most popular ones will get a chance to see their vehicles flying and hopefully rolling through the air. That, though, is going to be it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.